very briefly introduce Gregory Caete. Ursula is going to say a little bit more about him in a minute. And I've been really impacted by his writings and his reframing of science and his, the validation of traditional knowledge and how to, the relevance and the importance and really the urgency for today. And I want to invite Greg to open us up with a poem here.
Thank you, Jürgen, for that intro. I wanted to sort of open, our session today with this poem that actually comes from the very first book I wrote, which is Look to the Mountain, An Ecology of Indigenous Education, which I wrote back in, well, it was published in '94. I actually wrote it a long time before that time, but it has a life of its own now in so many circles. And so that painting, represents, my artwork, but it's also the asking of a question, the asking of a blessing, the asking for knowledge. And so when I was writing this book, my good friend Simon Ortiz, who was from Acoma Pueblo, asked, I asked him, could I take and use one of his poems in my book? And so I'm going to read the poem that he gifted me, and I think it really homes in on the image that was just shown with regard to the four directions, the seed altar, and some of the perspectives that brings into mind. And so I began with this poem, Land and Stars, the only knowledge, north, west, south, and east, above and below and all around. Within knowledge of the land, we are existent. Within knowledge of the stars, we are existent. Coldness and wind and the snow northward, mildness and mountain and the rain westward, hotness and desert and the hail southward, warmness and mesa and the sun eastward, starshine and sky and the darkness upward, earth source and stone and the light downward. By this northern mountain we live, on the western peak we live, in the southern canyon we live, upon the eastern mesa we live, under the sky above we live, above the earth below, above this earth below we live. We are existent within knowledge of the land. We are existent within knowledge of the stars, all around and below and above, east, south, west, and north. This is our power. This is our knowledge. This is our source. This is our existence. Always the land is with us. Always the stars are with us. With our hands we know the sacred earth. With our spirits we know the sacred sky. We are with the land and stars. We are with the stars and land. With offering all around outside, with offering all around inside. This is the knowledge we have. This is the existence we have. In thankfulness, we give and we know. In thankfulness, we receive and we know. Simon Ortiz, 1993.
Thank you so much, Greg, for getting us started with this wonderful poem, just so powerful and so clear. And I want to invite Ursula to actually formally introduce Greg now.
As I dove into my literature review for my dissertation years back, I needed resources on the Indigenous perspective of creativity. My dissertation chair had emphasized academic resources, not just stories I'd heard from Indigenous teachers or things translated through my own experience. It was in that moment that Jürgen handed me a copy of Native Science by Dr. Kahete. I was moved by the depth of Kahete's writings. His work became the backbone that my dissertation stands on, as it is written through the lens of Indigenous science. Having the measure of being introduced to a rich and sophisticated body of information dating back several millennia through my past trainings with medicine people, I could see Kahete's work articulated a very broad body of information, and yet was detailed with complex nuances, reflecting the sophistication at multi-levels of Indigenous Native science across many traditions: Tewa, Hopi, Aztec, Kogi, just to name a few examples. It was beyond a delight for me, for his knowledge was visceral, deeply informed, and profoundly stimulating, inviting me into creative worlds of conceptual imagination. Kahete was also willing to engage with me through email numerous times, and at one point we shared a phone conversation. He became a critical ally and informant, so I could speak to issues my university challenged where I was not academically conventional. This allowed me to stretch across bridges of conceptual understandings and present new ways of thinking to the Western mind through my dissertation. One example is that he helped me express the difference in subtle nuance between knowing, knowledge, and information. My university editor forbid me using these words in the same sentence, for they meant the same thing. After communicating to him about this, I was able to swiftly include Kahete's definitions of these nuances in my writing, and it was then accepted. I muse over Kahete's statement in his writing that native knowledge is the science of the subtle. I recognize that he is a treasure as a keeper and teacher of Indigenous knowledge to many, but especially to Native youth, who he dedicated many years educating, creating curriculums that would teach, engage, and share traditional information so that it had a chance to survive, inspire, and be planted like seeds in a garden for future generations. I express my gratitude for his willingness to engage with me in a relational meeting of minds, sharing candidly his thinking, experience, knowledge, and perspectives. I make a bow of deep respect and appreciation, and am honored to introduce Dr. Greg Kahete.
Thank you, Ursula, for such a beautiful and such a deep introduction. I really, truly thank you very much for that personal perspective. Indeed. Well, as Ursula said, I'm Greg Kahete. I'm from Santa Clara Pueblo. I've been a long-time educator, going on 50 years as a educator, and also have really been involved with just a variety of different kinds of programs. First at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, where I spent 21 years, and I was the dean of the school for the last 2 years. I moved on to the University of New Mexico and took on the challenge of reforming the Native American Studies program at the university. I'm proud to say that we now have a PhD in Native Studies at the University of New Mexico. I retired in 2020, just as the pandemic took hold of the country, and have been really just doing many different kinds of things, many Zooms, too many to count at this point, and doing different kinds of consulting and presentations with both community and also with national and international audiences. So it's really a pleasure just to have some time with all of you to give some thought and some perspective of the theme, And so, being a writer myself, I many times get the opportunity to read a lot of indigenous authors, that are, I'm happy to say, a lot of younger authors that are coming out and writing about things indigenous. So I have the opportunity to really explore these kinds of questions that are now becoming very relevant and very timely, given the kinds of issues that we're facing globally, also here in the United States, and also in terms of just humanity as a whole. So I like the question, the ancestral piece that we have to think about. I think very deeply and very humbly, but also think in a very deep way about how we as ourselves, as moving into the age group where we are, becoming ancestors. We're in the process of becoming ancestors ourselves. So what are we going to leave the next generation? And what kinds of thoughts and perspectives can we give them? Just as Simon Ortiz's, poem, he underlying that is the gifts that we have received from the land and the orientation that the land gives us, the land, the sky, the north, the south, the east, the west, and the kinds of understandings that we should have and carry forward become very important, for, I think, the next generation. So my presentation this morning or this afternoon is really about that question. And so I'm going to review a book with you that I had the gift and the opportunity to review. And so I'll go ahead and share my slide with that in mind. And let's go ahead and begin here. I'm hoping all of you can see this. Okay.
All good, we can see.
Okay. Let me get the whole slideshow up. There, you should be able to see it. So the book's title is called What Kind of Ancestor Do You Want to Be? And it is a summary. The edited volume is by John Hausdorfer, Brooke Hike, Melissa Nelson, and Catherine Cummings. And it came out University of Chicago Press, 2020. So I reviewed this during the pandemic. And the question itself, what kind of ancestor do you want to be, actually originated from a conversation that Winona LaDuke, who is also very famous for her work as a Native activist, as a writer, as a teacher, and her conversation with one of her elders on her kitchen, or rather on her front porch, as they were discussing this very same question. And the question that the elder asked her was, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? So in that question lies, a whole world of thought and perspective and understanding and insight. These are the authors. So the book is constructed in such a way that there's a series of authors that were interviewed. Some of them are here, as you can see. They include Aaron Abeda, Francis Kakugwa, Aaron Rice, Brooke Williams, Brian Calvert, Catherine Cummings, and many others. And so what they did was they asked that question: what is, or what kind of ancestor would you want to be? And so this is what they found in summary. Again, there were so many authors that it was hard to keep track of all of the people they talked to, including Vandana Shiva, and one of my former students, Lila June Johnson, who's an amazing performer and also an amazing scholar, Robin Kimmer, and many others, Melissa Nelson as well, Rachel Wolf Graham, Sherry Spiller, Linda Hogan. So this is what they came up with. What kind of ancestor do you want to be? It's a compelling question, eternal because it calls forth ancient wisdom, multi-generational ethics necessary for any human community to survive and thrive. It is urgent because of the planetary situation that we now face based on colonial overconsumption of resources, the domination of people, which dramatically threatens the livability of this planet. More than asking us how we want to be remembered, the question, what kind of ancestor do we want to be, suggests that we are already ancestors, even if we have never remembered or never had children. The question deepens our awareness of the roots that reach all of our actions and our non-actions. So again, thinking in these terms, what kind of ancestor do I want to be, becomes one of, I think, the quintessential questions of our time as we move forward with these ideas, these perspectives, these understandings. It really asks us, how should we live? The question deepens our awareness, as it says here, of roots that reach all of our actions in every moment, whether we like it or not, or whether we know it or not. We are advancing values and influencing systems that will continue long past our lifetimes. These values and systems shape our communities and lives, and we will never see really that impact in our own lifetime. The ways we live create and reinforce the foundation of life for future generations. We are responsible for how we write our values and write our storylines. We further and what we further and what we set forth. The world we choose to cultivate for the lives that follow ours. So how shall we live? So that's that first question. How shall we live? What's the role of the ancestor? Well, the role of the ancestor relies upon the realization of our descendants. Ancestry is intergenerational practice of becoming, of change in the world. Robin Kimmer reminds us is constantly in flux. Just as we prepare the young to step into adulthood and release childish ways for the health and growth of society, so the practice of becoming an ancestor requires the release of our grip upon what is and the letting go of certain ways of being in the world to embrace the changes required for the stream of life to keep flowing vigorously. So how do we begin? Well, we can begin to be an ancestor, living by stepping aside and handing over our power, our place, our voice in ways that nurture those who are coming up. Those may be your own child, your grandchild, your neighbor's child. Those may be your former students, your young friend, your young colleague. Those may be the young of other species. As Robin Kimmer writes, the grandchildren of the warblers, the bumblebees, and the hemlocks. Ancestors empower the living. A good ancestor empowers the living to live well so that life may flourish and the channel between ancestors and descendants may continue to flow. Being a good ancestor means understanding how to handle power, when to hold it, when to hand it over, and how to transform it. Just as our bodies, those fundamental sources of our power, will be transformed when breathing ends. So we can begin to practice being ancestors today by recognizing how we want to transform the power, the life force that we have been given. So good ancestry is a generous offering of one's life to an unknown multiplicitous future. Excuse me for the pronunciation. This is more important than ever to ask in 2020. My goodness, its importance has magnified in 2025, certainly. When our communities have become fragmented by a global consumer society, when ourselves have become isolated in a competitive and technologically driven economy, and when our spiritual, social, and economic and ecological impacts on human and other than human beings extend farther than ever imagined due to globalization and climate change. So the importance of this question now, this question catalyzes dreams, our essential imaginations. Dreams rooted in the instructions of peoples and places that came before us. Dreams that stretch our imagination long beyond our time and on this sacred planet. While this question holds universal relevance for all members of our global community, it is rooted in ethical traditions of the diverse indigenous communities of Turtle Island. Our ancestors guide us as indigenous communities, as tribes, as place-based citizens, as human beings. We know we would not exist without the love and the struggles of our ancestors. Our DNA reminds us of the bond that the late Dakota poet John Trudeau called descendants and ancestors. Because of this, through the lengths of time and countless generations, we strive to honor and recognize our ancestors in ceremony, in ritual, in song, in dance, and in the daily acts of gratitude. In this context, the metaphor "we are all related" becomes all important because that continuity, that relationship extends from the past through the present and into the future. Even we are all related even to the unseen, and we recognize that our ancestors are within us or in us, in the river of souls, the Milky Way, in the corn that we grow and eat, in the water we splash on our face every morning. We are the result of the love of thousands. Linda Hogan reminds us we exist because of the love and instinctual survival of our ancestors. And our love and regenerative power will create future generations. all those to come who are emerging from the ground of being to replace us as we return to the earth. We are trees. We are like trees with deep roots, connected with deep roots, connected to our origins in the earth, in the soil, in rock, and in stardust. We come from strong trunks and numerous branches of ancestors loving and living and recreating to make our particular branch an ancestral thread. We are our family trees, our genealogies, what our Maori relatives call whaka papa. In reflecting on what kind of ancestors do I want to be, I wonder, how does the outer needle of a redwood branch, 250 feet in the sky, remember its ancestors in the redwood roots? So everything, every living thing has ancestors. We are water. We are like rivers flowing from the humble springs, where fresh waters emerge from primal wounds of fertility and rebirth. We are the results of all those ancestral waters flowing back to the liquid mother as we travel down mountains and along riverbanks, flowing between roots among liquid minerals and sediments. We merge with all of those stories, all of those memories, all of those life forces. As our water flows and grows and transforms, we make habitat for new life, for the spawning salmon, for mating otters, for sparring dragonflies and other animal delights. This procreativity gives new life to new generations. I wonder, does a splash of fresh water meeting the salty sea for the first time acknowledge its ancestors in the mountain springs, in the river fog, in the thick gray clouds? Ancestral waters need to be explored and honored throughout our life on earth. We are seeds. We are like seeds holding the sacred spark of life, ready for new growth. When the conditions are right, we come from the kernels of our parents and carry their DNA with us or within us. Throughout our lives, we carry that fertility and that potentiality for regeneration. That life force has many names for our people. It is the mysterious spirit of life itself, the Manitou of the Anishinaabe. It is the mana from the Hawaiians and Maoris. It has many names, and even though it is ultimately nameless, many young people, you will see, are exploring their ancestors through renewed relationships with their ancestral seeds and food traditions. We are fire. We are fire, a spark of lightning meeting a pine snag, and then the twig becomes one fire that consumes and grows with fuel and air. Fire is our ally, although we have made it an enemy. Winnemen Wintu, spiritual leader, Kaleen Sick, reminds us of the sacred role of fire as a revered teacher to Native peoples. Humans are currently out of balance with fire. Thus, we are experiencing devastating fires as we have forgotten that ancestral connection, and we need to be in the right relationship with it as an ancestor and as a relative. Notipan Wintu ethnobotanist Sage LaPena reminds us that our relationship with our outer fire recalls our relationship to our inner fire. and that too has to be tended to rebalance. Prophecies are unfolding. According to prophecy, the 21st century Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, native peoples on Turtle Island, we are people of the seventh fire. In a time of remembering and repairing and revitalizing our ancestral lifeways that were disrupted from 500 years of colonization. We are preparing and hoping to light the eighth fire, a time of new people committed to peace and justice. To light this new this new fire, our prophecy says the last fire, we look to our human ancestors, especially the youth, and our more than human ancestors, to our cosmologies, genealogies that remind us we are all related, to the trees, to the soils, to the stars, to the seeds, and sacred sources of water and life. So as we all say, please join us in asking this question of yourself, your family, and your community. Your human and more than human relations and elders, your ancestors and your descendants. Embeddedness and reckoning. Embedded explores the ways in which being deeply connected to a place leads to understanding that our most powerful ancestors are those whose work, whose livelihood, whose hopes and visions have shaped the environment. Reckoning investigates ways in which we struggle with the past injustices to enact a more just future, whether through rethinking the violence that one's position of privilege enjoys, or understanding the exploitation exacted upon one's own people long ago. Healing of the earth. Healing presents ways of recovery from cultural trauma faced by ancestors, enabling future generations to thrive, interwoven to look at expansive ways in which we as ancestors will be remembered by how our values relate to the land and living communities. The integrity of our ancestors ultimately is predicated upon the integrity of beings, systems, and communities that our values and our practices enhance. Earthly looks to the other than human world for ancestors and for the instructions on how to live as humans from our other than human ancestors, other species, and ecological communities. The seventh fire and beyond returns us, or reminds us as well, to how this journey began, just as this book began with a question from Michael Dahl and Winona LeDuc, White Earth Reservation back deck. So this book will look to the next generation of Indigenous leaders for questions to guide us all as ancestors in practice. After pondering these questions of eternal urgency, their messages are the ones we hope will remain in your hearts and minds, and that you may live out into this world. We are all ancestors, and the life we seek. We believe that ancestor question indeed taps into something ancient, something that poets and oral storytellers of diverse cultures have talked about since the beginning of speech. We also hope this question awakens your senses, opens your heart, and engages you in a dialogue as you contemplate the many voices from the numerous cultural communities, as you begin to respond to the ancestor question yourself. Remember that we are the life we seek. And finally, we are deeply grateful that you have joined us on this journey. You are part of the most important ancestors, those who will contemplate this question and renew its relevance long into the futures of humans. As of all our relations, may the good spirit ancestors guide us. And so with that, this overview of the book, what kind of ancestor do you want to be, with really dozens of indigenous people being interviewed and contributing their thoughts, their insights, their understandings, their longings, their hopes, I think really begs the question, what kind of ancestor do we want to be? And really, I think hopefully really embeds it into our hearts and our memory. As we move forward with our own work, myself as an educator, every time I get up in the morning, I I ask myself this question, what kind of ancestor do I want to be? And sometimes I'm up to it, and sometimes I'm not, as will be the case for all of us, I think. So I thank you, for listening to these words, to these thoughts, these perspectives, and I'm open for any questions that anyone might have, given our time.
Yeah, Greg, thank you so much. And maybe you can stop sharing your screen. Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. And, the question is just so powerful, and really, this call to wakefulness. And I'm wondering, I've heard many people talking about original instructions, and it seems to be that, part of the work with the ancestor, or finding answers to the question, what kind of ancestor do you want to be, is, remembering original instructions. And I'm wondering if there's something you can say about that.
Well, I think all native peoples have their creation or origin stories, and these are stories that are metaphoric, lots of deep psychology, in these stories, and they really look at, our condition, our human nature, I guess you might say, and so they're packed with psychology, philosophy, sociology, and all the ologies, that are part of Western thinking. And part of the function of those creation stories is to remind us, to remember what's important, in terms of living a human life, and what and really the role of ancestors in the making, I think, is one of the most important takeaways from this kind of thinking, this kind of conversation, is that you think about, where you have come from, in terms of your own ancestry, and then you think about the generations that are coming after you, and most apparent are your own children and grandchildren, but it actually extends far beyond that. And you begin to think about, not only legacy, but also what kinds of knowledge, what kinds of thoughts and insights that they will carry forward into their time. And so this really lends a new lens to education. Why education is so important, but not necessarily the education that we have all experienced in that Western world. And this is what brought me back to thinking about what is Indigenous education. So this book, Look to the Mountain, an Ecology of Indigenous Education, is my exploration into that question. What is Indigenous education? And indigenous education is really about sustaining a people through place, through time, and through generations. And it's also a quest of humans to become more fully human. And so our stories tell of those kinds of visions, those kinds of reaching for those kinds of understandings, those kinds of insights. They're also full of human nature. You know, the underlying all of this is this quest to understand ourselves as being human. And so the nature of humans, you know, is very much a part of these stories as well. And so I'm thinking, you know, when we're looking at the news today, you know, and whether we want to or not, you know, what we're seeing really in a very direct and in your face way, the most negative of human nature. That really, unfortunately, in many stories, in many of our stories, is that dark spirit. I know uh, the Anishinaabe call it the Windigo, you know, and that spirit abides within us as well. And so we have to understand that we have that nature, um, and that we have to begin to think about how do we move beyond that to strive for something that is much more fully human and much more fully positive, you know, in terms of human life and also in terms of the life of the earth. And that's what native philosophies did. You know, and native forms of education attempted to do. They tried to create better humans in spite of our nature, our human nature as well, in the face of our human nature. So these are the kinds of questions, you know, we carry forward, you know, as ancestors in the making. So, so that would be my response to that.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And I see some questions or comments coming up, and I will point them out to you in a second. I just want to acknowledge, you know, this morning in our presentations and discussions, we were kind of more focused on the human ancestors. And you really, with this presentation, sort of expanded the circle. And, you know, you quoted Robin Kimmerer and saying, you know, the ancestors, you know, the warblers, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, and with your book title, you know, look to the mountain, you know, look to the mountain. That's, you know, that immediately puts us humans in nature, in our ecology. So I just want to acknowledge the widening of the circle. Now, you've just touched upon the shadow, you know, the darkness, the Wendigo, and
Yes.
it's a comment that I want to read out to you, and wondering if you have anything to say to this. If blessings and trauma are intergenerational, doesn't this suggest DNA can hold this information? And if so, that our work is to care for our DNA.
I would agree with that. I think that you know, we're just beginning to really understand how complex we are as human beings, and you know, science is bringing us into that you know, at least a one picture, one lens and one picture of the complexity of human beings. And so I think that everything that happens to our ancestors registers somehow in our DNA and is carried forward. And understanding, you know, trauma. Uh, so there's several ways that you deal with trauma. One is to let it take hold, and when it takes hold, it's like a disease. You know, it has manifestations of its own. But also, when we begin to understand that trauma, and move and find ways to move beyond it, we create a kind of new pathway into the future. And I think that's what we're all trying to do, maybe at a personal level, but also a societal level, is to create new pathways into the future that are actually the result of our responses to the trauma, both personal and societal, that we are experiencing. So I think there's a lot to be said about how trauma registers biologically in our being, and if indeed we carry that into the next generations. So I think the more we're able to deal with trauma now, and the healing of trauma, we promote a better pathway, if you will, for our ancestors or for our children and grandchildren. So again, the importance of education, but what kind of education? You know, how do we educate ourselves? How do we educate for that future?
Yeah, thank you for that. And epigenetics really has taught us, how it's carried forward. And, and that's, very profound, that it's reflected on in our somatic and our bodily level in our cells, as it
Yes.
were, this trauma. And I think what you're talking about, the process of remembrance and becoming a good ancestor, that's part of the healing work of
Yes.
this. Yeah. So there's another question here. Curious what bridges between indigenous knowledge and societal infrastructure, laws, government, community organizations, that are the bright spots in your sight at the moment. I guess, what's the connection between societal structures and other bright spots in that, the connections with indigenous knowledge?
Well, I think that, I have said this before, that the indigenous mind is rising from being in the margins, in all aspects of Western modern society, but now coming, closer to the center, and the indigenous mind is rising. But I think the indigenous thinking, is it's a very ancient form of thinking, and all human societies, have this understanding, this lens at one time. And it's a matter of understanding why that evolved among human beings at the very beginning of human cultures and traditions. It was about survival. It was about ensuring the survival of the people in a place through time and through generations. So it was about sustaining human life, and in the context and in relationship to life and nature. And so that's the profound that's the profound lesson. It's also the profound insight that has to be reestablished in a contemporary way that allows us to do something similar, and thinking about projecting those ideas into the future. It's already happening, all over the world, globally. This kind of thinking has already taken hold. In many ways, what we're experiencing also in today's world is really the last gasp of a very old paradigm that no longer is viable or sustainable. But there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of trauma in that kind of last gasping, of a society. So what's going to replace it? And those are the kinds of questions that are being, I think, entertained by any kind of thinking. People are doing that kind of thinking now. So that's why I say this what kind of ancestor do you want to be is a poignant and timely question to be asking. So we're a group, we all have an interest in this kind of question, but the idea is really to expand this idea in ways that allow others to be concerned about it as well, and to begin to work towards collectively addressing the kinds of questions that need to be addressed in order for us to begin to move forward, with this idea of really being good ancestors who have planted seeds that are viable and that are sustainable. So that's why I call it a big question. I was happy to, and I knew about the question long before the book was ever produced. Winona LaDuke had related the question to me, probably just as soon as she had come to that conclusion. We are all related. What kind of ancestor do we want to be?
The most critical and the most urgent question. And in the chat, there is a question that sort of addresses some of the challenges. As people, you have traveled away from their ancestral land, do they also lose their connection to ancestors and their stories? So this disconnection from ancestry through migration, through living in another country on another continent.
Yeah, I think, there's a loss of memory because of disconnection, because of movement, but there's something to be said for this idea of blood memory. If you're asking the question, there's something in you that's remembering, that there was something before, that you're connected to something more. And I think that the more people explore that, they begin to see and understand that we are connected to each other, through time and through generations, in a way that we still don't really understand, but definitely that there is something there. And so earlier in our presentation discussion, I was telling you I was intrigued with the I guess was it Peter that was the person that was doing the acupuncture?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And his comment that which I've been told by others, that they can feel your ancestral constitution in your pulses, what your ancestors have left you. So if you can feel it physically,
it's not
there's
just
something to be said for it to be there also psychically in some shape or form. And retapping those memories, may be possible, even though the actual connections have been lost historically. So that's
just,
why
Peter, you were trying to come in there.
yeah. It's not even just ancestors, it's people that influence us. I remember one time I was teaching a seminar and I was taking this Vietnamese girl's pulse, and I felt another channel. And it turned out, when I described the personality I felt, that was her caregiver. She was a child in Vietnam. She had like a nanny.
Yeah.
And so all the influences that come to us are sort of relegated a position of authority in place within our guidance. And it is fascinating, really, what's there. It's like in the way that we can get a sense of personality from music or the shape of a sculpture,
Right.
or a feeling from a piece of art. We also get that from the pulse, and you can just describe the personality unbelievably accurately. It's really kind of amazing. There's so many stories about that, but I already had my time. I really appreciated what you've had to say, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Thank you for your beautiful presentation. And in the chat, Glenn has reminded us, that our DNA, is so connected with so many other species, and with some in major ways, but significantly even with species in the plant world. So we do carry that.
Yeah, this is why, okay, so this is why in native thought, we take on the names of plants and animals that in our thinking, our process, we feel connected to certain plants and certain animals and certain places. And so certain places are sacred to us because of that deep ancestral memory. And that what Peter you've just said with regard to how different kinds of experiences, people, places, other entities, animals, other humans, impact us and sort of leave a trace memory that somehow comes through in communication through the pulses, but other ways as well. But I find that very intriguing, and this is stuff we still don't understand, but there's enough evidence to show that it does exist.
One interesting thought that might add something here, because of the quantum nature of biology, we think biology is very fixed. You
Yeah.
cut yourself, it bleeds, air comes in, you take a breath. But there are many different pulse systems. And I've been surprising, whatever pulse system is in your mind, you can find that on the pulse.
Ah.
The pulse responds. So it's and they've come up with pulse machines that can figure out something. So there is an objective quality, but whatever pulse system I'm looking for, the body responds and gives me that information, which I find mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing.
Literally mind-blowing.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. And I think it's time for us to move on, and we'll have more time at the end after Dawn's upcoming presentation for discussion and comments and questions. So, and before I introduce Dawn, who I think is here, right? You're back. Yes, you're here. I just want to acknowledge Glenn, uh, uh, who has been helpful in putting this together. He's an old friend and colleague and has supported our organization as we have worked together. We're doing things together. Glenn Aparicio Perry, we are putting out a journal issue together. So thank you for your help in putting this together, Glenn. So I want to turn it over to Dawn, and let me introduce Don just a little bit. He has many publications and has given many presentations that pertain to this. He has taught on indigenous ways of knowing. He's taught participatory research and indigenous way of approaching research knowledge. Very much concerned about decolonizing and indigenizing theories and methods, and critical theory and tribal critical race theory has been of a concern to him. And you will see this in his presentation here today. His presentation and writing on Native American spirituality and philosophy, really emphasizing the strength and the resilience of Native traditions. And also, I think this, overlaps with Greg's concern, the emphasis on, Native American traditional learning processes. Don is Blackfeet by cultural background, and he's going to talk to us about the Picani medicine bundle ceremony. Welcome, Don, and I'm so glad that you have been here during the morning. So please, happy you're here. Take it away.
Stupicani, Botanico, Itimaki. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I said I changed the topic of my presentation, and so if I let me get the share screen here and find my presentation. So I'm going to talk about the Medicine Bundle Society ceremony, because when Greg talked to me the other day, day before yesterday, and Jürgen had also talked about what your purpose and mission was in the society. I decided to go with talking about the Pekani Medicine Bundle, because we use that to what we call the circle structure, which is really the circle complex, to help our own people learn about our own ways. So here's a drawing or a painting by C.M. Russell. Some of you who are artists know about C.M. Russell. This is First Man, Napi, talking to the animals. And I say Bray Boy talked about stories are our theory. And so I'm going to go through this. Let me go to slideshow. So the medicine bundle is a bundle of sacred ritual objects. They reflect our worldview, how we think and have knowledge. Each object in the bundle has a genesis or origin or creation story. The bundle is opened at certain times during the year. The one I'm talking about today is a medicine bundle, Nanapska Aquinima, and it's we got this bundle from the Thunder Pipe. So there's a whole story behind that. And this bundle can be opened, is open in the spring and closed in the fall, but it's also let me go back here. I got some things in the way. Sorry about that. It's been a little while since I've done this, but each object in the medicine bundle has a story, but it also has movement, action, has song. There's pantomime. We dance. So using sign language, body movement, and each of them narrate the Genesis stories. So it's an interconnection of the bundles to Sundance and other ritual ceremonies. So we see a storytelling depiction there. Now, this is something that would take me quite a while to explain to you, but this is the circle that we set in, and it's the medicine pipe bundle ceremony. There's a female, male side, and we can't do any ceremony without both sides. And that's a metaphor. The circle is a metaphor for our ways of knowing, our ways of being. And the seating is this highly structured way in our ceremony that would take a lot to talk about. But this is the Medicine Pipe Society, and there's the medicine bundle up here in the middle. There's a fire there, some drummers, males and females, and there's some elders by the door. But the order of things integrate into meaningful patterns protected by rites of passage. So our knowledge is protected. Now here's some of my teachers. George and Molly Kicking Woman. In between them is a medicine bundle. Now we're not supposed to take pictures of medicine bundle, but this is George on the male side, and Reggie Crowshoe. George's wife is Molly over here. She has on the female side, and this is Rose Crowshoe, and this is one of the 4 drummers in this picture. But these are the people that I learned from. I was brought into the Medicine Pipe Society, and that gives me the rights and the privilege to share this kind of thing with others. And that reminds me, before I go any further, something I didn't want to do. I just want to take a little moment for everybody. If you just kind of take a little bit of time out right now, and just I need to do my own little meditation. So I ask you to take some time out and let's just meditate for just a minute here. Just take everything out of your mind and open to possibilities, some mindfulness, okay? Okay, not be not doing shit. It's about to be a productive suit. It's about to shoot us Pumokan. Pumokan and it's it that be like Pumos Nana. Not be quacks except quacks fire be quacks Pumokan and I will not need to be sweet, be executed to be Pumokan as Pumos Nan. The Namska Queenie Mans, Pumos Nan, the Namska key works, the Namska works. Nah, not the way, Pumos, nah. These two. Okay, let's go back. It's going to be a short one. The medicine bundle is cared for by the women. The actual bundle, they can touch it because they cleanse naturally, and men are dirty, and that's why we have to have the sweat lodge. So we can't touch an object in the medicine bundle until the female side consecrates the object. So that's just a little. I'm giving you just bits and pieces here of the ceremony so I want you to grasp the overall idea of what this is about. Now, what protects our knowledge is something called a rite of transfer, ritualistic rite of passage. Each bundle has its own society. I showed you the circle. I'm in that society. We make a lifetime vow of a lifestyle we're going to live. And there's, for everything that we do, there are rituals, protocols, procedures when we're brought into the society. And the medicine bundle objects are ritually conveyed to members throughout the life. When I first joined, I was given the crane, so I danced with the crane, and I know that song. And I have other objects, the rattle, wana, I dance with that. Thus, each member gains entitlement and privilege to objects, stories, songs, and ritual. So in that circle I showed you, we moved up in the circle from the doorway, eventually up into being maybe a keeper of the medicine bundle, like George Kicking Woman as in the other picture I showed you. So eventually we become. So here's the inside picture of the medicine bundle concept we want to talk about. The bundle consists of spiritually significant items, such as animal, bird pelts, rocks, ceremonial objects, rattle, face paint. So each one of those objects, as we said, has a story, has a genesis account. Each one has a dance, each one has a song. So has its own ritual movement. And so it is a collection of objects that we consider sacred or holy. Bundle ontology. Knowledge is contextual to individual, society, and ceremonial settings. So some of the knowledge is protected and stays in with the society. Some of it is shared, like this medicine bundle opening that sometimes people are allowed to come and observe. But here's something important, significant thing. The bundle has volition and personhood. The first person that wrote about this is a non-Indian Loksengard who visited our elders. So this is metaphysical knowledge. This is not Eurocentric knowledge. So the bundle has volition to share its power or not. And it has what Deloria called a metaphysical corporeal presence, a sacred divinity present in the objects to make a whole. So all of the objects in the bundle make a whole. So it's holistic knowledge because we're all related. But the rites of passage protects the epistemological integrity of knowledge and rituals. As I mentioned quickly, that when you're brought into the society, you're giving more knowledge. Some of the knowledge is in the society and some of it is shared outside with the people, and so knowledge is contextual. A Queenie-man. One of the most holy objects in the medicine pipe bundle is this, what they call a smoking stem. Now, a lot of this whole talk, a lot of it is in Adolf Hungry's series of books. 2 feet long, has feathers. You see the depiction. It has its own song, story, but it's one of the main items in the medicine bundle. It has the metaphysical ability to assist individuals, families, community in many ways, including healing illness. The ceremonies may be conducted upon request of individuals or family, not only for healing illness, but if you had a bad dream or you sense that something bad is going to happen, you can ask to dance with the medicine pipe, and so we will have the ceremony. And this ceremony is an all-day complex ritual, songs, dances. We do part of the ceremony for a half a day with just the society members, and it's opened up in the afternoon for others who could come in for ask for healing. Now, the healing pipe dance rituals. A person who's sick, for example, this is kind of an example, may make a vow to dance with the medicine pipe, and it will go to the medicine pipe keeper of the medicine pipe, who will then call a ceremony. So when the ceremony in the second half of the all-day ceremony is where other people come in. Now the keeper of the medicine bundle handles the medicine pipe, and there's a depiction here where he's standing with that pipe. Blankets are laid on the ground around the fire pit. If you remember, that circle had a fire pit in the middle. Now, it takes male and female. So the male, of course, the female gives the pipe to the male. He takes it out, and such a sacred object that blankets are laid on the ground around on the teepee floor for them to stand on. And the medicine pipe man and his spouse, along with the man and wife of the person who's going to be healing, or let's say if he's not married, family member, this is all about community. It's about family. Eventually, the pipe is handed to the sick person who dances with it. Now, this is danced around that circle that we're sitting in that teepee. So they dance 1/4 way and back. And then they dance halfway. And at the half point, that's where this medicine pipe was given to the one spouse to dance with, and eventually then it's given to the sick person who will finish the dance on this side and give the pipe back to the female who keeps it. So the healing pipe dance end. At the end, the blankets on the floor are picked up, and those are given to the medicine pipe proprietor, the person who keeps the bundle. And I'll just mention this, that I keep saying proprietor, keeper. And the old name used to be the owner of the pipe. But actually the pipe is transferred. The medicine bundle is transferred every 4, 8, 16 years, because it's important in many kinds of ways. If you're keeper of the pipe, you're around a lot of power. But in any event, the sick person and family then provides, and this is called payment, but it's actually gifting, honoring the pipe holder for them praying and dancing with the pipe. Now, when that healing dance happens, we as medicine pipe members of the medicine pipe society also stand in place in that circle and dance and sing the song and pray, offering that. And the sick person's family may provide gifts to us who are members of society. So, so that's it, folks. I know that was rather quick, but I hope you got some understanding of what it's about. So with that, I'll open for any questions, comments, or concerns, or whatever. It's a dialogical process. I'm a Freudian.
Well, thank you so much, Don. I appreciate what you're saying here. And there were sort of, two things that stood out to me that I think are, where Western science and indigenous science or indigenous ways of knowing or coming to knowing really sort of diverge. You talked about, and maybe you can say a little bit more about it. You talked about epistemological integrity. And so there seemed to be, immediately a connection with ethical behavior and all of that, how to do it right. And then the other thing that you said, you talked about the personhood of the bundle, right? So here is something that is, gifted in a sacred way, that has its own being, which, Western science really doesn't have any accounting for, but there's something about that honors our interconnection and honors our interconnections beyond what we can immediately see with our eyes. So I just want to invite you to say maybe a little bit more about that.
Well, everything in the bundle we're related to. There's rocks, there's plants, there's animal plants, and there one of the rocks, Siniscum. That's one of the rocks. The Genesis story on that is that when the women were out getting wood, the rock spoke to her and gave her the song and the dance and the ceremony to call the buffalo in. So when she went back to camp with her wood and the other females, she shared that story. And so that story contains that traditional ecological knowledge that I think relates to what someone was talking about with Greg. What is the light that shines? People are interested in that traditional ecological knowledge. And that's also in that story about how, although we do harvest the buffalo, that Siniscum told them how to call the buffalo in. But part of the ecology is it's usually burn the grass above a ledge at a certain time of the year so that it attracts the buffalo. So those stories all interconnect. And the way I look at it is, talk about this is that, when I use Descartes, when the Eurocentric knowledge separated man from nature, that's where we separated from the natural world. And this other question we had about all being related, I like to use the periodic table that shows we're all made of the same substances. And the other thing I like to use is particle theory, and Greg and Leroy Littlebear talk about this, that everything is composed of minute particles that have energy. And for us, that energy is spirit. Now, the physicists know about particle theory because they develop instrumentation to measure that. But now we're talking about indigenous knowledge that, and we'll put it this way, physicists know that there are minute particles that they don't have instruments to measure those particles. And by the way, those particles have energy, but to Native people, that's spirit. So energy is spirit. And so when they can't measure something, then it doesn't exist. So it becomes abstract theory. So these are the differences in our knowledge, how we're all related, that we're all made of the same thing, and that we can communicate with the animals, with the plants. And in that medicine bundle are some plants that was given to us in spiritual kinds of ways. So so I don't know if that Jürgen answers your question, but I think the question of I would have if I was from the outside is, and I do have this question: how can someone be healed by dancing with a physical object? Now, there's some things that are really profound here that we don't know. And just to share this, as I was a health administrator on a reservation for many years, and I brought physicians, doctors together from our Indian Health Service and our medicine people who use these old ways. And we had a dialogical process for a couple of days. But I always remember when I met after with our medicine people, they told me this: well, they have the same medicine we have, but they just don't know how to use it. And so that's a little bit maybe to get a grasp on what this is about. But also, it's not questionable. It's a matter of acceptance of this existence. It's all part of our metaphysical world. And by the way, this here now world we're in is actually a physical world. That's just the real world is actually in the metaphysical. So there's a lot of things we can talk about in this indigenous ways of knowing, but the ontology, some of one of Frere's followers, Kincherlee, talked about that missing the beauty of indigenous knowledge because we've discounted it. We don't listen to that. We don't pay attention to that. So we miss the beauty and the knowledge of a whole another knowledge. And I see we have my friend Glenn here. He talks about the shared consciousness that we talked about, some of those things this morning. So yeah. So
Yeah,
I mean, more questions.
yeah, thank you for that. And what you're really emphasizing is that there are these subtle, nuanced perceptions that we usually don't pay attention to, that most of us are not trained to pay attention to. They're there, they're happening all the time, and we miss out on them. And you talked about particles. David Bohm, he says that meaning goes all the way down to the particles. There's active meaning down on that smallest level. And that is, of course, what you're saying. And I think, realizing that and paying attention to that and honoring that. And I think, when I hear this bundle, ceremony, the transfer ceremony, it is really the honoring of that deepest and most subtle knowledge that we can hold and that we can share and that we can use really for the benefit of everybody. Yeah. So thank you for what you're saying. There is a question, Don, if you don't mind. The Western pill-based medicine has so extensively operationalized and industrialized the scaling of medicines. How would indigenous thought think about sharing medicines to peoples at scale in a way that honors these nuances? And I think that's really what we're talking about, these subtleties that very subtle, but very powerful, right? Somebody dances with a bundle or with a pipe and healing happens.
Well, there are substances that heal, and we do have medicine people with their specialties that have certain substances that they use for different healing purposes. So we just need to ask. But the important thing is learning the protocols of the way to ask. Maybe sometimes you may go to, for example, George Kicking Woman, and someone may ask to get some medical help with a situation, and there is a referral system to where they might refer them to someone like my aunt Mary Madplume, who treats with substances. But remember when I talked about those doctors, they have the same substances. But when the medicine people said they don't know how to use them, they don't do the song, they don't do the ritual, they don't do those things that go with the medicine, because that's an important part of the holistic way of administering someone physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, huh? And so that's part of the process too.
Yeah, you just talked about protocols, and correct me if I'm wrong. You know, I hear that as that's what epistemological integrity is, right? You follow the protocols because the protocols, they preserve the knowledge, they get you in touch with the nuances of the knowledge. So when you can have the same, technically the same medicine, whatever, the same chemical structure, but without following the protocols, following what guides you into the nuances, really they become much less effective or ineffective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, and the physicians did say this when we met with the physicians and the medicine people and medical doctors will say that. Yeah. Sometimes there's one of the speakers before talked about a couple of people being Catholics. My mother's a Catholic, and she had a spot on her lungs, and so she called. They have a prayer line. So she calls 5 people and they call 5 more and they all pray. And she went back to the physician that they were going to open her up in surgery and take a look at it. But when they done all their the x-rays and all of that, the doctor came back to her shaking his head. He said, I don't know what's going on, but it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
So there's those kinds of things that in the Eurocentric science that yeah, we don't know, but then as I say, some physicians will say, well, yeah, if that's what worked, then that's what worked,
Yeah. And transpersonal medicine and so forth, touch just a little bit on that. Here's a question for you in the chat. When the wound or illness is generated by generations of colonization and destructions and is as prolific as generational trauma and ecological systems collapse, what ceremonies of healing can be used to heal?
Well, I would say this, that I'm a product of the 70s. I just had a birthday here this month, and I'm 80 years old, and so I wasn't raised this traditional kind of way. But let me approach it a little differently. I happened to have the opportunity to start our own tribal college. And when we started our own tribal college, we wanted to teach our own history, our own culture, our own knowledge. But many of our people resisted that. And that's where John Murray, who's a medicine person, was studying a doctor program with me, but he dropped out. And what Frere talks, one of the effects of oppression is how the oppressed can become the oppressors. And so some of our older people would resist, saying we can't teach our language. You can't, things have changed. That's an old way. But Paulo Freire said that through the dialogical process, we can examine things using our own knowledge and find our own ways to bring about transformation. And so when we look at things like trauma, that was talked about before, the ecological kinds of system, that, you know, healing is a process. I was addicted to alcohol. I done everything. I went to therapy. I went to the self-help groups. Went back to the Catholic Church, but it was also about the time they brought me into the ceremonies, and no matter what I would do, there would be relapses. I might stay sober for 6 months, for a year. Finally, I went with Wilbert Fish and went to the sweat lodge for every Sunday for almost a year. And once when I came out of that sweat lodge, I told him, you know, something is different. I feel like something is gone. I just feel light, huh? And he just laughed, and that was it. So doing all of these things were important to the process. And I think that's what's important here for in Indigenous knowledge. It's about process. We're so busy in the Eurocentric wanting to answer. Tell me now, what is the answer? But it's about the process. And that's what life is for many Indigenous people. It's about the process. It's not about the answer, about the outcome. We're talking about trusting the process. But and so that's where I lost that. It was, and it was gone. But I had to go back to go through that whole process. And I'm going to share this. I'm at the point where I'm sharing things that I don't tell anybody, because I was a professor. Or some things you can't say. And I'll just share this with you. Yeah, I was a rancher. I was a cowboy. That's what I wanted to be. But I got all busted up in rodeo, and my mom made me go to school. But when I was brought into ceremonies by our elders, and by the way, I sat in this ceremony 10 years observing before I ever made the vow to live a particular kind of life. That on my little horse ranch up next to the Rocky Mountains, there's a nice little stream about half a mile away from our house. I was walking by there, and I heard some drumming and singing. And I thought, well, it's some of our young people that sometimes come from town and come out here and party and have like the river party, and they do drum and sing. So I went looking for them, and I knew where the spots were because I could remember, but I couldn't find anybody. And so I went to, remember I showed you that photo of George Kickenwoman. He was my elder teacher. Because I was learning ceremony, then I went and asked him, well, I told him what happened. And because it scared me. I'm a macho cowboy. when I heard that drumming and singing, I walked really fast home, but I didn't want to run. I'm not a chicken, you know. I'm not afraid. I'm a macho cowboy. And but when I asked George, his response to me was, "Did you remember the song?" And my mind was, "Geez, I'm just telling him I got the hell scared out of me, and you're just telling me that I remember the song." And so those are that spirituality of listening and learning to listen. And that's the thing, is that what I've learned, all of us have spiritual experiences. Yes, I think we all have indigenous roots. We all have experiences, but our mind is trained in the Western kind of way to not pay attention to these other things over here. That was just my imagination, that kind of thing. So I don't know if that answers this question about woundedness and healing. And healing is a process, and it's tough. And I'm listening to Greg. I mean, those of us that, hell, I've been in trouble with the law. I've done bad things. There's sometimes I have been a very responsible person, but joining that society changed me. And they say that it will change you. And so I don't know if that gets a little bit to about trauma. And I really believe in the truth and reconciliation movement up in Canada of those elders, where they finally got up and said out loud that about the churches and the priests and the ministers and the nuns sexually abusing them. You know, that's where the dialogical process, being able to talk about it, being able to say it, and so yeah, I had to heal from hating white people. I mean, I didn't heal from that till I was in my 20s. But guess what? The government has blood quantum. On my mother's side, I have a little bit of Irish. My father's side, of course, with Papillon, he was a Frenchman that married in, but on the Irish side, Henry was a non-Indian who was a scout for the army, but he brought the army over to where, oh wow, it's leaving my mind right now. But anyway, the Indians killed him. But let me get to the point. I was asked by sometime in this whole healing process, and I've gone through also a lot of healing process with a lot of our own people. One of our own females asked me, "Have you ever got in touch with your whiteness?" And whoa, I'm just learning the old ways of who I am. And then she asked me about this little part of me that, hey, I don't like those guys. I went to that white school and we used to fight every day. And so that's trauma too. But it's a process, and the process was I did have to learn to love myself in a non-grandiose way, and learn to accept that I'm not perfect, and there's nothing perfect. In fact, what a relief when my therapist said, "Don, you don't have to do everything." So I didn't have to have a perfect slide presentation.
Well, thank you for sharing that and your personal sharing. I really appreciate it. There are a couple more questions, but just I picked up on something that you said there that I think is very important, because earlier, with Greg and in other conversations, we talked about how knowledge is passed on, and what you were saying there, what scared the hell out of you was, well, the ancestors were around you. They gave you a song, basically. They were there for you. And I think that's another thing that we haven't really talked that much about. But So we may not have the knowledge, we may not have the memory, but the ancestors are there, and they can help us out like they were, helping you out. And I think that that's very important. There are
And can I
two
say one?
questions there.
It's really interesting that the medicine bundles contain songs and dances and stories, because that seems to be what's left out of a lot of healing. So that's like bringing together the whole person. It's such a beautiful concept. It's something that I think we could remember from wherever we are, that the healing bundle contains dances and songs and
Yeah, and
stories.
I think that's the holistic part, and I did put that in there so much in that little presentation that Alan Pard, one of our medicine people, said it this way, that ceremonies are a reenactment of the Genesis. And that's what it's about. We're just reenacting it. And I remember there was one of our writers called me one time and asked about that. And he was very good at writing, but he said, "Oh, it's like an opera." Then, well, I guess you could say that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Let me, there are two more questions or comments in the chat. The Wendigo was mentioned, you mentioned it, and can you comment on how financial compensation is coming into traditional circles as traditional knowledge holders having PhDs? But Jack Forbes has written about how bringing in a capitalist mentality corrupts.
Yeah, that's well, in our way, it's about those traditional values, and that's where living in this culture now, it is a value conflict. When the old ways, I have a friend, in fact, I studied business myself, is that if you become a leader of our band groups, or we don't have like one supreme leader, if you become a leader, it's because you share wealth, because you're a good hunter. You come back and you share that wealth with other people, but you also have the ability to get wealth. And so now in capitalism, uh, we're supposed to keep wealth. And remember, one of the value conflicts is that, and this can be ontological too, that selfhood. I'll put it this way: community is more important than the self. Continuation of the community. And actually, I didn't talk about this, but that ceremony that we do in the beginning, it's about praying. And it's like many Native Indigenous people and all peoples, that we're praying for all peoples. We're praying for all things. We're praying for the water, for the air, for the plants, for the rocks, for everything. And it's about continuation. We're not saying we want this to be a perfect world. We just want the sun to come back, the cosmos to come back. We want the air, the water to be there. We want the plant to grow. And that's what we're asking for. And so, yes, I think being a traditional, that can be a value conflict. And for me, I had to really work that out. Somebody mentioned freedom, and maybe that was you, Jürgen, that if I really believe in freedom, that sometimes when I would talk about these traditional ways in science circles, someone would tell me about this effects of oppression, they learn about it, and an Indigenous person say, well, that's good, but I don't want anybody telling me what to do. This is all about choice. All I can do, as many of you are teachers, is to provide you information. The freedom of choice is you have that ability to choose that way or not. And so being a capitalist, yeah, that's a here and now situation. I'm earning income. I'm concerned. I'm retired about that. And money is important. And let me say a quick little way of doing this sometimes. The old ways we used to gift medicine people. But the real world today is medicine people don't have income coming in. So many times we can give money to them because they need to buy food like all of us. And some people are against us giving money. Well, you shouldn't be buying something. Well, you're not buying. You're just giving them this gift that they can exchange for what they need. So yeah, so that's that conflict, and that's where we have to look at that. And one of our native philosophers talks about that interstitial space that we're in, where we're in this Eurocentric world, but I want to live these traditional kinds of ways. But that's that contradiction. But there is a space in between that I can find sometimes, just like when John beat that drum and I almost fell asleep. And I did say that I felt a moment of bliss there. And so that was that interstitial space that I could be in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Don. There was another question that, you've talked a lot about the importance of process, and you mentioned Freire and you mentioned the dialogical process. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, that's where tribal councils, in the old way, we lived in socioeconomic groups and bands. We were Buffalo people. We had to travel in order. We learned from the Buffalo that you had to move around this earth in certain kinds of ways to protect the plants and that. So we learned that. That's where we learned about moving around, but also I wrote something called Myth of the Chief, and there are chiefs, there are leaders, but it's a shared leadership kind of way. And for example, when let me get it this way. The tribal council is a dialogical process. That's where the spiritual leaders, the civic leaders, I'm in the Brave Dog Society, that's a police society, they sit in that dialogical circle, and that's where they decide when they're going to move camp. Well, what society group is going to be the scouts in the front and the back? Who's going to be responsible for breaking down the camp? And also, there's a shared responsibility that we all get to be the police. There wasn't a separate police society, but there were certain times when different society groups got to be the police. So if we each got to be the police, we're not going to abuse that role, I would think. So that shared concept and that dialogical process of decision making is part of what Paulo Freire was, and that was in our natural kinds of way. And some of this is spiritual too. For example, when the people would say, well, we have to move because the grass is getting short, well, that's where the medicine person who is connected to the weather would go out and pray. And he or she would pray and then come back to camp and say, this is the direction we're told to go.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to bring Greg also back in here. And I want to, invite you also to comment, and I want us to return a little bit to our, our theme, planting seeds for the future. And this image of the altar with the seeds. And I think we've heard, many ways, I think, and many important suggestions and practices of how to do that, how to do our own planting, beginning with this really powerful question: what kind of ancestor do you want to be? So, Greg, I want to invite you in also to speak as we're sort of moving towards the end of our session here.
Yeah, I just want to thank Don for his sharing. A very, very beautiful talk and explanation of the medicine bundle ceremony among our people. And so it's a good example, I think, of the difference in the indigenous worldview and the Western worldview. And even I was watching the kinds of questions that were also being asked and posed, to Don. And it also shows, I think, how different we as indigenous people think and Western people think. And I think part of that in-between space, the space that Don is talking about, is it's a very important space for the dialogue to happen. One of the things that I think also concerns a lot of Native people is reciprocity of knowledge. So the idea of sharing knowledge, but also being also Western sharing of knowledge. With regard to kinds of things that Native people need, to survive in the contemporary world. And I think that comes basically through Western education, so, I consider that a kind of sharing as well. But yeah, I think, we're at the point in time where we do have to have dialogue with each other, build bridges of understanding, really reflect on we're all in the same boat. We have a saying among my people: we are all kernels on the same corn cob, or kernels in the same basket. So, no matter which way you look at it, because of our interconnection with each other globally, in each of the nations and in each of the regions, we're all interconnected, whether we know it or acknowledge it or not. We're connected, we're related. So that we have to really acknowledge that in a very real and direct way. Native people are on their own journey of, a lot of Native people are reconnecting to their roots, to their traditions. A lot of Native people are looking forward into the future and, preparing themselves for the future through Western education, but also through self-education as well. So we're kind of in a dynamic mode. That's what I call the indigenous mind rising. It's also expanding in so many different ways. But I think that that's happening in so many different kinds of ways among most and everybody practically, so that you have to sort of find what is your process, what works best for you, what kind of knowledge, and what do you want to reconnect to, in terms of the ancestors. What is it that you want to reconnect to? What reflecting on those kinds of questions, for yourself, I think are important kinds of things to be asking, as well as, what seeds do we want to plant for the future? I've already kind of my seeds are my work with my students, and then also the books that I write. I mean, so those are my seeds, and the contributions that I'm able to make with regard to sharing myself with my community and my family and such, and so I think all of us have different ways in which we share and we plant seeds. And I think we need to reflect on that and honor that. And then if we have the capacity, maybe extend that in ways that we can. So I didn't used to like Zoom. I really detested doing Zooms. And now I find myself Zooming all the time practically, more than face to face. But Zoom allows me to extend and to share in ways that I was reluctant to do, or I just didn't have, we didn't have the tools in the earlier days to do this kind of sharing. But now we do. So it's learning how to use that tool in ways that extend our thinking, our ways of knowing each other, and of connecting too. So that's what I would say. In terms of where we need to go next is do more of what we're doing, and do it with passion and do it with spirit. And that's all we can do. We contribute to the whole in that way. And
Yeah,
that's also, I think, the role of elderhood in no matter which culture you come from.
yeah, thank you for that, Greg. And I take some of what Don shared about the ceremony of transfer. He's kind of setting a little bit of a bar of how we're taking care of our ancestral seeds. And there's sort of, you talked about integrity, you talked about commitment, and it's really when we follow those protocols, whatever our cultural protocols are, that then we actually engage with the subtleties of this and the depth of this. And so I really sort of appreciate that call to this higher bar of engaging in these deeper levels. Peter, I also want to invite you if you have you want to say anything as we're moving towards the end here.
I think one of the things that's most interesting to me, the Tibetans have a thing called self-secret. In other words, there are some people that keep hidden, some traditions keep knowledge hidden. And yet the more advanced levels of the Tibetan practice say that just put it out there and the people that can get it will get it. And when I was young, nobody knew what non-duality was. Now I can make a joke about non-duality and, suburban housewives get it, although suburban housewives are pretty cool these days. What has been this ancient knowledge from the Eastern traditions and the indigenous peoples all over the world is actually flooding into common understanding. And although I've definitely seen it get watered down and misunderstood, it's kind of soaking in, and I think it's creating a powerful foundation that none of the traditions alone could maybe keep alive. The future of acupuncture looks different. There isn't as much interest in it as there used to be, unfortunately. I think some of the indigenous traditions are having trouble. My dear brother Raymond Ruka, who died recently, was saying that the Maoris are having trouble finding students to continue that tradition. And so from a certain sense, the power and the wisdom of these traditions is waning. but at the same time, it's finding its way to kind of moving its way into a fundamental understanding of how things are. And so I think that as we go forward, I'm 75, so I don't know how much forward I have. I hope a bit, but it's really a matter of finding a way to keep the sacredness, the pristineness of these concepts alive, and yet find a way that it makes sense into the world. You know, I use a pendulum a lot in picking up acupuncture points and doing diagnosis and stuff. And it's amazing how nobody finds that weird anymore. When I first did it, they go, "What are you doing?" But now it's considered sort of normal in a way. So I think our job, or at least a job, is to keep the specialness and the pristineness of this ancient tradition, because it's so important to the lifeblood of the wisdom of Earth and the continuation of what's going on, and yet find a way to make it understandable in a general way. Maybe that's confusing what I'm saying, but I'm maybe not stating it correctly, but it's a worry I have, because these things are diminishing. Have other people found that?
Don, Greg?
Well, I just wanted to make a comment that, you know, the philosophical discussion between what is secret and what is sacred. And those of us that are academic know about intellectual property. We have some knowledge that belongs to us. That's ours, huh? And someone else taking it and using it can abuse it, huh? And so with us, there is protected knowledge, and knowledge is contextual, and that's where some of our native philosophers, Cordova from northern New Mexico, talked about that some knowledge is protected in that society. And let me put it this way, Reggie Croce, who uses our teepee encampment around the Sundance Circle, that on the outside of that Sundance Circle, there's 4 levels. But I mean, well, let me put it another way. Not everybody needs to be in a medicine society. In fact, many people are told by their families, don't go into that. And some people will say also it's dangerous. So we talk about power, abuse of power. Some anthropological students come to me and they talk about, well, there's gatekeepers. When they go up there to the Pueblo, want to talk to them, I told them, hey, I really respect those people because they are protecting their knowledge. And as a teacher of Native American studies, there are some of the Pueblo people that say we don't want any of our things talked about in the classroom. And so they protected their knowledge and their language, and I think that's good. And if we're going to have this other thing of respecting all things, if we respect all things, we need to respect others' ways and knowledge. And this thing about gatekeepers, if you want to know about that, hey, go up to Los Alamos. There's all kinds of secret knowledge up there that's protected. There's gates, and in fact, there used to be that gate going in there. But for some of us, like us Picani, I mean, we talk more about these things more openly. But I appreciate again even those people that are very conservative in the native traditional ways and don't believe about talking about anything about us in outside of but that's the key too to this knowledge, is knowing what you can talk about and what's protected. Yeah, there's some things that I know that only our society members know. There's some people like my aunt that has been given some medicine to heal people, but that's been given to her, and she cannot share that with anyone, because if she does, it will lose its power. And so that's where power needs to be respected. That's what respecting all things. That we know that taking certain substances, something can heal you, but if you take too much, it can kill you. So
Well, that's, that's obviously critical, what you're saying, but with as many people in the world searching out these hidden things, these special things, these sacred things, the secret things, and with the pervasiveness of science, I mean, really all the most esoteric things that I've ever learned in Tibetan Buddhism, and I mean, a lot of people way ahead of me, but I've been with some of the greatest teachers in the world, and when I look at those concepts, what they're talking about, it's what science is talking about. And so at some point, there's this expansion beyond the indigenous, which I mourn because it's so beautiful, and the expansion beyond the esoteric into some sort of common, higher functioning, higher frequency of living, and with perhaps different language, for science language or normal language that's understanding these deepest principles of the indigenous, of the sacred, of the Eastern, and so forth. It's inevitable that it's going to be much more a part of society. And somehow the transition of that, and I mourn that. The traditions that you're talking about, the hidden, the sacred, the secret, the individual, the pristine. I love that. I've sought that out my whole life, but I see that it's diminishing, and I see that it's spreading in a more pervasive way, and I've been trying to understand how possibly to keep the pristineness of everything you're talking about, and somehow make that a part of more of the common and pervasive understanding of what that is. I don't have an answer for that yet.
well, but part of what I believe is that it's not dichotomous. That science is good, but we also have native science. That's just a different way of that. Besides worldview, it's that it is that epistemological kinds of knowledge. So there's nothing wrong with science. Gee, I go and get shots and use the medical system. In fact, one of our people who has been in remission in cancer danced with that medicine pipe, but he also chose to use the Western medicine. He's been in remission for over 20 years. So.
And I think, Don, you just said, it's not either or. And I think some of the difference arises from, when I hear you talk about this bundle, or the way Greg talks about, the ecology, there's something that is an intimacy, a very deep relationality with a place that so often gets lost in the Western sciences. And I think part of the knowledge, the ceremonial knowledge, the spiritual knowledge, and the knowledge that, a culture feels they need to protect arises from that. And I think it's really important what you were saying, to hold, both of these lenses. And, 2 years ago, I was at a conference that was entitled Two-Eyed Seeing, which really, emphasized what you were saying, in the sense of, appreciating Western science and validating and asserting native science. And I think that's, really important. We're out of time. We're out of time. We're in the middle of a good conversation here. So I just want to make,
You
yes.
want to, Glenn?
May I say something, Jürgen?
Yeah.
Before you wrap? Okay, thank you. First of all, deep gratitude, Jürgen, Ursula, Lucy, everyone who's organized this, to Don, to Greg, to Peter. Thank you so much. I just, I was able to meet Don through Leroy Little Bear, and what Leroy liked to say when we were doing dialogues between Western and native scientists was dialogue is like climbing a mountain. You know, there's many ways to climb the mountain, but when you get to the top, we all share the same view. So I really appreciated that. So we can learn from everybody. It's so beautiful. And this idea that was brought up by Don, speaking about spirit, is what scientists call energy. It's also what linguists call meaning. So it's interesting that Jürgen is talking about David Bohm going down to the very tiniest material and coming up with meaning. So it's just so beautiful. But I want to say one other thing, just real briefly. Don's story about hearing the song, that was deeply moving, because I think it brings in something related to the last conversation that we're talking about with the esoteric, the secret, and the sacred. Yes, there's protected knowledge, absolutely. But also spirit is moving through. Spirit is always revealing itself to us. So any person could possibly receive that knowledge, and protected or not, it's going to come through. And if that happens, that's so beautiful. So indigenous can be a verb, perhaps, indigenizing to where you are, to that land. It's very beautiful. So thank you to everyone. Appreciate it. Much love.
Yeah, thank you for that, Glenn. Beautiful. Thank you. So just very briefly, within 2 weeks or so, the videos of our meetings are going to be posted on our website. You will be able to access them. We do this type of day-long event about every 3 months. So the next one is coming up on May 3rd. We'll have an event, and you'll get the newsletter and you'll get the announcements about that. But what's going to happen in the very near future on February 15th is Stanley Krippner and Stephen Schwartz will be talking about remote viewing, and you will also get announcements about that. And once a month, there will be a Stanley Krippner lecture event that is happening. And I encourage you to stay in touch if you haven't signed up for our mailing list. If you go to our website, you can sign up, and you'll find all the information. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank our presenters and everybody who's helped organizing this and make this happen. I really appreciate that. And I want to give Dawn the final word for a closing. If you have a closing, Dawn, for the afternoon.
Okay, well, I don't know about closing, but I know at the end of a dance, the elders will say, "Kahuna kyayo." What does that mean? Let's go home. But before that, I want to plant a seed with you. It's more than a seed. It's a real situation. I want your help. Missing and murdered Indigenous women. And that's something that we desperately need help on. And I was also reminded by a non-native person that it's not just women, but reauthorizing the Women's Act, and we know our politics right now are something that was brought up. But I always remember the Frenchman who was incarcerated down on Devil's Island that tried to escape so many times. And finally, he's an old man. He escapes on the sea. And some of his last words is, "I'm still here, you bastards." That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for everything that everybody has shared, your comments, questions, presentations, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and for your intimate sharings. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
And
Thank
many blessings.
Many blessings. Right. Thank you, Don, for the most unusual, wonderful closing. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.